I'm actually not supposed to be speaking to you today. I have a divorce decree that says that I cannot publicly speak or write about my marriage. It was a very tangible attempt to silence a woman, but here I am, and I'm going to publicly speak about my marriage. It had a fairy tale beginning. I was asked to sing a duet at a wedding in small town Iowa at the age of 19. We met for the first time at the wedding rehearsal. He walked down the aisle while I was preparing the microphone, his father at the keyboard and his mother on the oboe. We couldn't stop talking, well, mostly me. The way he looked at me with such admiration worked like a trance on my insecure soul. Less than a year later, we sang the same duet to one another, this time at our own wedding. He had introduced me to his family's religious beliefs, which set the man as the head of the household and the wife as submissive and cheerful, with the goal of staying home and homeschooling as many children as possible. The first time I had a cold, he gave me NyQuil 24 hours a day so that I would remain sleeping and he could go about his life without inconvenience. It was such a small step towards silencing me that I didn't think anything of it. Then when our first pregnancy ended in a devastating loss, he offered no hugs or words of comfort. My feelings were silenced because they made him uncomfortable. I began to experience depression, but I figured it was because of the miscarriage. I was learning how to use denial to protect myself from reality. When I had the stomach flu, I asked him to pick up lunch for myself and our young children. He returned 6 hours later with no food and a new sports car instead. I was angry, but I already knew how to remain silent. It accomplished nothing to express my feelings anyway. By the time the abuse escalated to physical and sexual, I had developed a large capacity for denial. I had already learned that my feelings and my body and my needs were insignificant, death by 1,000 paper cuts. I had a child conceived through marital rape, but I told no one. I believed that it was my highest calling not to disappoint my husband. When psychological pain is not dealt with, it often presents as somatic or physical symptoms. By the time we moved to Grinnell in 2011, as an attempt to reduce his commute to work and increase our time together, thinking that that might be the problem, I had become a shell of myself. Although I had been an avid weightlifter, I could now barely walk much of the time, which puzzled my doctors. So now I'm living in a new town, away from most everyone I know, and I've come to the place in my life when the cognitive dissonance between what I believe to be true about my role in my family and what I'm experiencing are causing so much friction that I'm about to implode. I separated from my husband at a time when I literally believed that what I was doing was morally wrong. We attended therapy for over a year and tried again. Then, after one particularly abusive date night in Iowa City, we were driving home in silence when the window from the RV beside us flew off and shattered onto our windshield. It was terrifying. And as I slept that night, I woke abruptly when a framed picture of us fell off the mantle and glass shattered once again. I asked for a third instance of broken glass to confirm that it was time to go. I knew I was getting a message. As I talked with my friend about the situation, a text message arrived from my husband that he had broken the glass at his job site, something that had never happened in his 10 years of owning the business. I was shook. It was time. I filed for divorce. I took the hands of my toddler and we danced to Uptown Funk in the kitchen. I was free. Yet, so much struggle was still ahead. Overnight, I went from wealth to poverty. I was cut off from all access to our bank accounts, which were fed by the businesses that we owned. With no income, I couldn't afford a lawyer, and so he kept almost all of our assets. And soon after our divorce, he stopped paying child support for our 4 young boys as well. Having stayed home for the past 10 years, I had little to no resume. I lost over 90% of my friends as they believed that my decision to divorce was sinful. But most of all, I lost my sense of self-worth, which had been tied up in adhering to the rules of this alternate reality that I was living in, one that justified men using their power against women. I had never felt so alone and so ashamed in my life. And I could no longer afford to eat or shop or travel to ease my pain. I was sitting in a very dark room, in a very dark place, deep with mud, and I felt like I couldn't move. I was so numb. But then I saw this little light far in the distance, and I realized I could slowly trudge through the mud to get closer to it. And the closer I got to the light, the bigger it became, and the less mud was pulling down at my feet. To this day, I'm still on that path. Now, I've finished my master's degree in professional counseling, worked with other traumatized women as a counselor for 5 years, started and sold businesses of my own, moved back to Des Moines, and now I'm the executive director at Beacon of Life, a transitional home and programming for women coming out of crisis. I'm no longer poor, and I have an amazing, supportive friend group and a strong sense of self that does not rely on adherence to someone else's rules. So this light was coming from what I like to call planet reality. I could feel its gravitational pull pulling me away from the alternate reality that I believed to be true, one where I didn't matter and my voice was silenced. You have probably felt this pull before. You know that there is something better. That pull will create tension with the ways that you may be clinging to an alternate reality, maybe one at work, at home, at school, in your friend group, on social media. Stop and pay attention. You can feel it. In an alternate reality, rules are established by people who have power, and they use it to control others out of fear. The light that you can see is coming from planet reality, because reality is that we all have equal, unchanging, intrinsic value and deserve to have our voices at the table. Every step toward that light requires courage. And as you take that step, the fear that you once had becomes an illusion of the past. And now I'm the one who's shattering glass.